I've decided that this year for Christmas, I would leave a tape to tell you a little about my life. It will probably be mixed up here and there. I'll remember things when I'll stop, and then maybe 2 or 3 days later I'll remember things. So it will be a mess like everything is around there. Today is Chad's birthday. He'll be 19 years old. It's October 31st, 2001, and I am 78 years old. Although I don't feel it, I look at it and I act it. Someday you, I hope, will all be this age and you will understand, along with my kids, that you get forgetful, set in your ways, and a few different things when you get our age. Now, I would like to tell you a little about my relation, starting from with my grandparents. They were George and Josephine Cushman, which was my dad's parents, and they were married over 67 years. My mother's parents was Anna and William Baker. He was a farmer all his life, and they had accumulated some money. The first three-level homes, it was all built out of brick, and not brick, but rock that came from this farm. It was really something, but it burned down about 15 years ago, all the inside. My grandpa Cushman was a sheriff in Nebraska. They moved back to Rui, Wisconsin, and he had his own livery station. I don't know whether you kids know what that is or not. It's where a driver would take people from Rui to Platteville, which is about 15 miles, and they would have a driver, which my dad drove the livery slacket for several. This was sort of a carriage that people would ride in instead of a bus or car or something, which we didn't have then. They didn't have those days. He would take people from in this carriage. I imagine it took most of the day or even longer sometimes. From my parents, my grandparents each had 5 children, and my parents had 5 children, and I had 5 children. Of course, that's counting John, who died when he was 8 months old. I was born in Platteville, Wisconsin. I was the youngest of the 5 children. Fawn, who was next to me, was 5 years older than I was. So needless to say, I was sort of spoiled. At the time of my birth, my dad had the Platteville Dairy, which he delivered milk all over town with the help of my brother Cleve. The next memory that I have is when we lived on the Cunningham place. My dad was herdsman for him. During the Depression, my folks had 2 farms, but they lost them in the Depression. So my dad had to go to work for other people. So his first job was working for this doctor who had this farm, Dr. Cunningham. He raised purebred Guernsey cattle, and he would have my dad take him by trains to different shows, Chicago and around. I was remember living in this house. This was also a rock house. And when I mean rock house, it was these boxes they would get off the farm, and the walls would be maybe 12 or 14 inches thick. I can remember sitting in the windowsill, which would be that thick. We would heat by wood, of course. My mother cooked on a wood cook stove. At that time, when we lived there, my grandpa and grandmother Baker lived with us because he was sick and he died while we lived there. I can remember it was really cold when he died. It was so cold that they couldn't dig the grave, and so they didn't have the funeral until about March. He died in February or April when they could really dig the grave. The place was quite a way off the road, and that's where I started to school. We would have to walk to school naturally, and you didn't call school off because of snow or anything. You went to school. My first year of school, I think I cried every day because I didn't like school and I wanted to be at home. Of course, I still had to go to school. Fawn and Flo, my sister and brother, and I would walk. Probably it was about mile and a half or so. And the name of the school that I went to at that time was Robbins School. After school, I'd have to walk home alone. And I can remember this one house I didn't like to pass because the old lady there was all bent over. And she also went to one of our churches. Her name was Lizzie Mormon. Lizzie, not Lizzie Mormon. Lizzie Spruce. She didn't talk all that plain, but if she was out in the yard, I was scared to death. From there, we lived. Wait a minute, I'm getting ahead of my story. This doctor that was really good to us, the farm that we lived on, Dr. Cunningham, I can remember every Christmas he'd bring us a bushel of apple, and then once or twice a year, he'd bring out boxes of clothes that his daughters had outgrown or didn't want anymore. And my mother would make these clothes over for Flo and I. So it was a good thing she knew that sew, but I had a coat made from one of those girls' coats. I can remember it. It was plaid with a fur collar. We always had to wear long cotton stockings and long underwear, and you'd have to fold those underwear so they wouldn't show. Try to fold. And then my mother would make me black satin. It was the satin like we had. It had more cotton. Black satin pants, underpants. And she always put a pocket in them so I could have my handkerchief in that pocket. Once in a while, there would be tan ones that I could wear. Well, Flo was always wanted to look just so dull. So one time, my mother made her wear long underwear. It was so cold. So she sneaked the scissors out of the house, and when we got to the main road, there was a culvert. So she sat down and cut the long underwear off and stuck them underneath this culvert and then went on to school. When we got home at night, my mother noticed that she didn't have her long underwear on. So she made her tell the truth. She made her go out and get the long underwear out of the culvert and the scissors and come back in and sew them back on. So she had big bridges where she had to sew them back on. We always grew big gardens, and I can remember when we lived there, we always had people living with it. But when we lived there, my dad dug a deep hole, and then he put straw in the bottom of the hole, and he put some of our carrots, cabbage, and turnips, and any other root vegetable that we had. He'd put a layer of that, then a layer of corn, and a layer till it was filled up. Then he would put dirt on top, and then whenever we needed any kind of vegetables in the winter time, he would go out and dig in this hole and come back in with fresh carrots, fresh cabbage. Oh, it tasted good. Onions, anything that they could say. My mother always canned a lot, and one of the best things that she canned was the meat. It would be canned beef or canned pork, and they would be chunks of about inch or two square, and then she would put them in the canner and can them, and that was always a treat. But we never had it only like on Sundays or when company come. While we lived there, my grandfather died. I think I told you that. Or I don't remember if I erased it or not. Anyway, then my grandmother moved into a house down on the farm that she still owned. When we left there, my dad got a job at the college farm. They had two houses, and they had two men like my dad that they called herdsmen. And the college that was there was mainly teacher and agriculture. So he had all kinds of boys helping him do the milking and take feed and clean the barns and every chore that was around. That there was always boys helping. And we had chickens. And at one time after I got old enough and was going to college, I had a job with the chickens. I got 25 cents an hour. And it was, the chickens would jump in the nest and they would be trapped in there. And I would have to go out twice a day, and each chicken had a band around its leg. And I would have to mark down which chicken I got out of that nest and write it down and write if it laid an egg or not. But getting back to my younger days, we lived at that time the older house that the college had, and it was right across from the cemetery. And one of my main places to play was in the cemetery. And the two guys that dug the graves for the cemetery would always shave the bow ribbons off of the bouquets that was on the grave. At that time, they were always put great big ribbons on them. And I had yards and yards of those ribbons. I just didn't have anybody to play with. I was so much younger than everybody. So that was one of my places that I went out to visit them and get my ribbons. When we moved there, I also had to move to another school at Platteville, and it was called the Brick School. I went to the Brick School until I entered the Platteville High School, and I went to school at Platteville for 1 year. And it was a pretty good-sized high school at that time. When I went to 7th and 8th grade at the high school. And at that time, Bond was a senior. And the bell would ring and we'd all pass from one class to another at the same time. If he would see me in one end of the school hall, why, he'd let out this terrible burp, and he yelled out, "How'd you like that one, Buzz?" That's what they named me, and it would embarrass me to death. The reason that they called me Fuzz was we moved to one place, and the first night we were there, well, we were out playing in the yard with our neighbor, and I had a fuzzy hat on. They didn't know my name, so they started calling me Fuzz. So that's how I got that name. Anyway, at that time, I can remember every winter, my aunt and uncle, my dad's sister, and her husband lived in Kansas, and they would have a drought every year. So they would come back and spend the winter with us. Her name was Nell, and we had Aunt Nell and Uncle Olin, her husband. We had Kenny Webster, which was the guy that was about 19, and he went to our church, and he didn't have a home. Then we had two kids. The boy was my age, and then the girl was younger. And their dad had been killed, and so their mother left him with us while she went to beautician school. So they were there, and that's who my mother had to cook for. It was a good thing that the college would give us a couple of pigs a year and a cow to butcher. So we had plenty of meat, and I can remember we grew cane one year, and they took it to the mill, and they would bring the molasses back in milk cans full. We always had plenty to eat because we had chickens, so we had chicken. We had eggs, we had meat, we had milk. My mother would churn butters, so we could feed these people. From there, my dad quit the college farm, and my mother had fallen heir to some money, so she bought a couple of houses in Platteville. She rented one of them out, and we lived in the other one. But I can't remember what my dad worked at there. Then we moved. By that time, Fawn and Phyllis were married, and his father-in-law had a farm up by Rui. So we moved on that farm. My dad worked for Phyllis's dad, and I went to high school at Rui. The farm was mainly because he was an implement dealer, and they would put trade any kind of an animal for a piece of machinery. So they were always getting different animals. We had donkeys, we had goats, we had sheep, we had cows. Anything that he would trade, he would bring up to this farm. Well, I went part of my sophomore year to Rui High School, and two of the teachers were two men that had worked for my dad on the college farms. Well, school, we had our final tests, and I rode on we called it a bus, but it was really like a van. And whenever you got your final test done, you could leave the school. Well, of course, I didn't have any place to go, so I stayed in school. But two of the kids that went there, their father run a tavern, so they were bringing back wine, beer, whiskey, and everything. And just about the whole school got drunk. So when I was riding home in this bus van, why they were hanging out the window, vomiting and everything. And so I didn't say anything. But about 3 days later, these two guys that used to work for my dad came over to our house and told my folks that that was no school for me to go to, that I needed to transfer to another school. You see, then I was kind of Miss Goody Two-Shoes. Well, I transferred the next year to Livingston High School, and I had to stay with Fawn and Phyllis because I was out of my district. And so I had to stay with Fawn and Phyllis in Livingston. Fawn had an implement business there, and they didn't have only one bedroom apartment, so it was in an old hotel building. So I stayed on the first floor in a room by myself. People could just walk right up to my room, into my room. So, and then I ate with Fawn and Phyllis. Once in a while, babysit for with Kay, their oldest daughter. From then, they found a place for me to stay with an older couple, and I ate with them my meals and stuff. They were really nice people. I was there last part of my junior year, and then my senior year. That's where I graduated from. I met your grandfather while I was going there. I also met a girl by the name of Betty Kinney, and her and I were big help. We were bound and determined to go to every dance that came along, whether it was in Livingston, Platteville, any of the surrounding towns, which they're all about 10, 12 miles apart. We used to have really a good time. One time, I shouldn't tell you these things, but we skipped school. I wrote a note for her and said she had to go to the dentist. He'd signed her mother's name, and she wrote a note for me, and I forget what I had to do. And we hitchhiked to Lancaster, which is about 16 miles. And some truck driver picked us up, but anyway, we got to Lancaster, and it was cold. So we stayed in the city hall bathroom until it was time for the dance. And we went to the dance, and it was getting later and later and later, and we didn't have a way home. So my mother thought that I was at Betty's house, and Betty's mother thought she was at my house. That worked a lot. And finally, two of my cousins came in. My mother's brother, Uncle Irby's two boys. Talk about rednecks. They were. I got them to take us home. Well, my uncle never came to see my mother, but that weekend he was there telling them what we had done, how his boys had to bring us home. Well, I was grounded for like 2 weeks, but somehow that weekend I got to go to a dance. I graduated from there. I was cheerleader at Rui High School and prom queen. I was cheerleader at Livingston High School and fair queen. And I was cheerleader at college 1 year, because I only went 1 year. So all you girls in the families that's been cheerleader, it's the second or third generation. I was skinny, but of course we didn't have short skirts or anything. The outfit in Rui was black skirts, pleated, long, not real long, but below the knee, with a black sweater with the letter R, and the letter was trimmed in gold. The cheerleaders leading outfit at Livingston was purple satin slacks. They were kind of tight-legged, and a gold satin blouse with great big sleeves. It was a beauty. And then the one in Platteville at the college, that was a white sweater and a white skirt with light blue trim. It was pretty. Getting back to the school. When I was in Platteville, I ran around with 3 other girls, and we dressed alike. We done everything together. because we went to church a lot together. And the first black person I ever saw, I was about 14 years old, and they came through our town for a camp meeting, and it was a mother and a father and a young boy. And that was the first black people I'd ever seen. Of course, we went to church, the camp meeting, because we wanted to see how they acted. When I was growing up, my dad was a very religious man. We went to Sunday school and church on Sunday at the Primitive Methodist Church. And then in the afternoon, we went to the Tabernacle, which was non-denomination. And we went to church in the afternoon. And then at night, we went back to the Tabernacle. It got so that it was just a little much. At the Tabernacle, I was telling you how I was scared of that lady when I was walking home. She went to the Tabernacle, and every once in a while, the minister would let people choose what song they wanted to sing. And so she always would yell out, "Hold the fort, for I am coming." Well, that's all that we all needed. A bunch of us sat together, and what we didn't think of doing, but we'd pass notes. We would go through the songbook and name the song, and then we'd say "between the sheets" and sit there and laugh. Well, it got so that the minister wouldn't let us sit anywhere but up on the front seat, so we didn't laugh anymore. We also, every Wednesday at our school, in grade school, we would have religious day school, and every Protestant would go to the church of their choice, and we would have Bible study from about 1:30 until the regular time school was out. The Catholic kids would stay at school, and I don't know what they would do, I guess study or read or something. But as I was growing up, you sometimes wonder why I don't go to church much. I think that I went to church so much when I was a child that it just got to be kind of I just got too much of it. It isn't that I don't believe in prayer and in healing and everything. I do, and I try to be good, except I like a few off-colored jokes, and I like to go to the boat, but it's just been drilled in my head so much. When we were growing up, we couldn't do anything on Sundays except maybe play ball. We couldn't play cards. If we had company, of course, we play games and stuff. But that was the one thing that my father was very strict on. I can remember one time when my mother had all these people always living with her. She was getting a pie out of the stove, and of course she always had a coal, or not, a wood-burning stove, and she burned her arm, and it was on a Sunday morning. And she said, "Oh, shit." Well, my dad really got after. He told her that she would never go to heaven for saying that word. And she says, "Well, if the good Lord keeps me out of heaven for saying that word, I don't know whether I want to go or not." Well, he was a good man, though. I never heard him swear. I never heard him say a cross word to me or any of his daughters. He might have to the boy out in the barn or something. Now, getting back to where did I leave off? Oh, in high school. The December that I was a senior was when the war started. Of course, it didn't mean much. I can remember where we lived and hearing about it, but it didn't mean much to me at that time. But I soon found out what it was all about. My father moved back to the college farm to be herdsmen again. And we lived in the little new house. So I entered college, and I was there a year. It was really a sad time because all the boys were leaving for the service. It seemed like every day we would walk down to the bus station and there would be a load of the boys taken off for the service. Your dad, your grandfather, and I got married in April after the war was declared. And by that time, he was in service in the Navy. He was in the submarine service. Lo's husband was going to the same college that your grandfather went. It was in Platteville, and it was called the Mining School, or Wisconsin Institute of Technology. And about all that went to that college were men. Maybe there was one or two girls. And that college and the college that I went to fought all the time. They were always doing tricks on each other. Like they would call the college that I went to, because they had mainly teachers and agriculture students, Platteville Tit College. And at one time, they painted in black paint 2 great big booths on the front of the school. And so the college boys went back over, and they had a cannon sitting in their front yard. And they got that cannon loose somehow, rolled it down Main Street. Well, and then another time, when my dad was working at the college farm, the mining school boys got 2 or 3 young calves and fed them a bunch of stuff that made them go to the pot. And they brought them in the school somehow and left them loose in the main room. And they absolutely went to the toilet all over that place. Well, of course, the college had to get back at them, and or the mine school had, I can't remember, they had their homecoming out on a farm where there's a great big M that you can see from 3 states. They would light that up for their homecoming, and it was really a pretty sight. Well, so that got them back for that trick. Well, then the college built a great big pile of stuff, hauled for days, old buildings and trees and limbs and everything, and then we had what they call a snake dance around this pile. On top of the pile was a privy, toilets. So they were just, the snake dance was supposed to start about 7 o'clock. Well, the football field was right across from our house, and then across from that was the cemetery. And the college boys fixed up some underneath the fence across the road down in the cemetery. And just as everybody was gathering to start the snake dance, they lit this bonfire. Well, it was just one thing after another. So finally, the state took over, and they combined the 2 schools. So it was called University of Platteville. So that kind of put a stop to all that. But it was just one mess after another. But it was a lot of fun. Your grandfather had to go into the service, so I moved in with my folks, Marshall and I did. At the time, I weighed about 89 or 90 pounds. My brother Fawn always said for me not to stand still for a very long at a time, because I was so skinny that some dog would come along and think I was a telephone post and lift his legs. But when I was so skinny, of course I was pregnant. And when Marshall was born, he weighed 9.5 pounds and I weighed 90. I'm back. It is November the 5th. And I just replayed this tape, and I kind of got things out of whack. I went off on one subject after another, but, I'm old. During the war, everything, or most things, was rationed. And depended on where you live. If you lived on a farm, you got more gas, or if you had farm machinery to use and stuff, you got more gas coupons. And then they would give you a book that you could buy coffee or let's see, there were several things rationed. I know I don't know whether cigarettes were rationed or not, but I can remember coffee for sure and sugar. And you just watched everything that you cooked or ate or tried to raise most things because you just didn't have it. Of course, nobody went hungry in the farm belt. In my immediate family and in your grandfather's immediate family, your grandfather went in the submarine service. Flo's husband, Bob, went into the Army, and he helped a dentist where he'd been trained to do a money engineer. But they just put you wherever they needed you. So he was a dentist assistant. They had fun. They drafted him, even if he did have 4 small little girls at that time. He was sent overseas as a cook. And then in your grandfather's family, there was Donnie, and he was in the Navy. He was all around Japan and all in there. Dwayne was in the infantry, and they had a telephone or a telegram once that he was wounded in action. But later on they found that when he jumped in a foxhole, he'd sprained his ankle. There was the youngest one, Bub, was in the Merchant Marines, and Dwayne met his wife in service. She was a WAC, and that was the women's part of the Army. You had to have so many points after the war was over in order to get out. The war lasted several years. At one time, after Marshall was born, I went out to Connecticut, where your grandfather was stationed, and we lived in one room and had to wash diapers and stuff in the bathtub. From there, we moved into an apartment. It was right on ground floor, and the bedroom was right next to the sidewalk. And he was shipped to Philadelphia while I was there. Every so often they'd have blackouts. Everything, you had to turn off everything. There couldn't be any lights in it. I was scared to death. One time I turned on lights, and boy, they knocked on the window right now. Told me to turn that light off. There we heated by a little drum stove with wood. One morning I was trying to get it to start, and I poured kerosene, and it kind of exploded and took all my eyelash and eyebrows and everything. It was up on a hill, and in order to get groceries or stuff, I would have to go down this steep hill with Marshall in the stroller and pack all my groceries up. It was terrible. Well, I finally got to move to Philadelphia, where he was, because they were decommissioning his boat. That means that they were doing away with the boat that he was on. And so there we lived on the 3rd floor in one room. No air conditioning, no nothing. But there was a lot of other Navy wives there, so it wasn't too bad. We could go down on the porch and sit. From there, he got moved back to Connecticut. The name of the town that we lived in was Groton. Well, it was called Quonset Hut. What it was a trailer that they built during the war for servicemen, and it had a kitchen and a dining area and a bedroom and a living room. They weren't too bad, really, but you had to go to washrooms to do your laundry and stuff. We lived in that until he got out of service, which was in December. We had a junker of a car, didn't have any heater, just about froze to death coming home. We only got lost once, or twice, coming home. One was in the middle of New York City, and the other time was Belmont, Wisconsin, which has a population of about 200 people. Right, 8 miles from Platteville. In order to get out of service, you had to have so many points. I forget how many points. You got so many points for the number of years you served, so many points for time that you were overseas, and each thing like that counted up. And I think it was like 32 points you had to have. Well, on the trip home, as I say, we didn't have any heater and no defroster. Well, he had bought a package of, I think it was gin and scotch and whiskey in a package, and we were taking it home so he could celebrate. Well, we had to use the gin and scotch mainly to keep the windshield clean because it would frost over so bad. It was a horrible trip, but we made it through the war. And it was a trying time for everybody. But of course, there was always some people that got along better than others. Like my brother Cletus at that time had a grocery store. And if things would come in that was like canned anything that was rare, well, his wife and family would go get it before the hoarders did. She'd always say, I got to get to town and get it before the hoarders. So she had a regular grocery store in her basement. After the war, your grandfather started back to school. And all the boys' school was interrupted. And you could go back on the GI Bill, it was called. So we bought a trailer in Madison, and it was 21 foot. And we lived in that trailer until after Janet was born. But he went to school for a year at Platteville. He finished there. At that time, they didn't give the whole degree. And I worked in the restaurant that his folks owned, and his brother Dale was running it. So I worked there while he was going to school. And that was someplace. It was right across from college, and at that time the college didn't serve any meals or anything. Cafeterias weren't heard of. And so between classes, they'd rush over to get coffee or their meal or something, and then rush right back. And it was hard work. I think I made about $15 a week, and got so that when I take my check to the bank, they wouldn't cash it because there wasn't any money in the account. So in order to get my money, I'd have to take it out of the cash register to get what money we lived on. He finished that year. We bought the trailer, and we moved to Missouri. Lo and Bob moved there also. He had another year to go too. We lived in a trailer park right on Route 66. That goes from New York City to West Coast. And hot, it was terrible hot there. Be like 90 degrees at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then you'd step out of the trailer and dust would be about halfway over your shoes. We didn't like that place, so we moved to another trailer park. And the same gang, it was I think 4 trailers that were from Wisconsin, and then there was I think there was about 8 or 10 trailers that we all moved together. And then we moved again from that place, and then we stayed up the last place until we all finished college. From the college, Missouri, we moved to Genoa, Ohio. But first, while we were in college, the government would give us $90 a month, and our trailer payments was $40. And to park the trailer was like $20. We had to pay to wash, and I think it was 50 cents. And then we lived on the rest of the money. So you see, we didn't live too good. But at that time, like a pound of coffee was 30 cents, and hamburger was like 5 pounds for $1 or so. So it was a lot cheaper living. The last month that we were in school, they raised the pay to 120. So all the people in the trailers that we parked with all the time, we all went out to a big fish dinner. Then we moved to Genoa, Ohio. He worked for U.S. Gypsum, and I loved it there. We had so many friends. They were all about our age, and they were engineers, and we just really had a good group and had more fun. Then some dynamite salesman told him about the job at Oolite. We came down, looked at the place, and decided to take it because I think we were going to get $450 a month, which seemed like we were really going to be rich. Well, when we moved down, we lived at the end of the road down in Oolite, and in the back of us, the hill went straight up. You didn't have any lawn. And that we had a little side lawn. And then there was a road in front of us, and there was a strip of land that you could have a small garden. And then the river. The river never got up to our house, but it got real close. Well, everybody was so different, and I just hated it down there. And didn't know anybody, and he worked all the time, and then after work, he'd go fishing. And he usually took Marcia with him, and that left Janet and I there till dark. Well, I got sick and tired of it, so Janet was about 3 or so, and we walked up to the store in Oolite, where he parked his car. At that time, I didn't know how to drive either, and I let all the air out of his tires. Of course, he was mad, but he kind of got the idea that he needed to stay home more. Then we lived in Oolite. Marcia went to school at the Oolite school, and I could see it from the house. And just about every time you look out, when this one teacher was there, they were all outside playing. They were swinging on grapevines and going all over the hills. Then the next year, they got a man teacher, and he was a good teacher. He pretty well kept them in line. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and then they built a school in Battletown, and he transferred up there. And shortly after that, the man that your grandfather worked under retired. So the company bought some land up on Battletown Road, and divided it. It was 5 acres, and we were to get 2.5 acres, and they were to get 2.5 acres. And she died about a year before that, and then before he got to move, he died. So we ended up with the 5 acres, and I liked it up there. By that time, we had gotten acquainted with a lot of the people from here, and I started really liking it, and I found out that the people would do anything for you if they got to know you and liked you. I still think a lot of the people from Battletown that's still alive down there, they helped me a lot in different ways at different times. Then Rick was born when we lived in Oolite. I went to the clinic up in Blackville, and he was born in the clinic. We didn't have ambulances or anything then. The hearse brought me back home that night. And we had a 12-year-old girl helping me. And that's all the help I could get at that time. Because people thought we were strange because of our different ways of cooking and talking and everything. They didn't really know us at that time. Then we moved up on the highway. and the kids got to go to Brandenburg School. And let's see, Marcia was about in the fifth or sixth grade, I believe. Of course, Janet started at the old school now that burned down. Rick went to school there, and so did Joe. We lived on the Battletown Road till Joe was about 4 years old. And then we moved into town and lived in Eastwood Hills for a year. Then the house that Janet and Jerry live in now came up for sale, and we looked at it, liked it. I believe it was 30,000 at that time, and the people had fallen heir to it from the Applegates, and they didn't like living here, and so they kept coming down on the price and coming down, and every day that we didn't take it, they'd call and bring the price down. We ended up paying 13,000 for the house, and it's up for sale now. For, I guess I better not tell you. Anyway, of course, we had to rebuild the whole thing after the tornado. So, and Janet and Jerry have done wonders with it. Your grandfather never had time to work and do outside work. The only one thing that he did, and I'll never forget, I was working at the dollar store. One day I came home and he had taken all the front porch off, and the front porch went all the way around. Had trim and everything, because he would have had to put new floor on the porch, and he didn't want to waste it, and he had cement that he could pour. So I've always said that it needed pillars in the front, and it looked like a bald-headed man. It needed something, and I guess I'll never see the pillars. I really loved that old house. There's something about the place that draws people. You've always got a crowd of people. I guess because it's so big, and people just like to come there. It's right in the center of everything, but yet it doesn't feel like you're in the center of town. There isn't that noise or anything. I think I'll close for today and get to making a cake. I'll see you in a couple of days. I'm back to recording. At least I think I am. Today is the 13th of December. It's been a month or so since I last talked. There's been several things going on, and I haven't gotten back. After your grandfather and I got a divorce, I lived in the big house for about 2-3 years. And in the meantime, I met Ralph. I moved to Jeffersonville, and I lived up there about 7-8 years. I hated it. All the people I knew would live next door, and I'm just not a city girl. I was tickled to death when we got back to Brandenburg, to my friends and kids. I'm starting to tell now about different things in my life. I remembered a bunch of things that were rationed during the war, besides the gas and the sugar and stuff. You got little coupon books. In the coupon books, you had so many points for fuel oil, kerosene, tires for your car, shoes, and meat, which didn't affect us too much, but there's beef and pork, and tea, and butter, and lard. During this time, Oleo came out, but being in a dairy state, you couldn't get Oleo in Wisconsin, so we would have to drive to Dubuque, which was about 18 miles from Platteville. My mother had high blood pressure, and the doctor told her to stop using butter and to get Oleo. We would go down there and buy several pounds at a time, and it would come in a heavy plastic bag, and it was white like lard. And in this bag was a little yellow capsule. and you would break this capsule and knead the bag until it would all be yellow. It was a hard time getting used to the oleo, but as of now, maybe I have a pound of butter in the house in 5 years' time. I happen to have one right now, but that's for Christmas baking. I also, nylon stockings came out about that time. And during the war, we couldn't get the nylon stockings, so we would buy bottles of, it was like makeup, and you would put it on your legs and give them a color, because then we did believe setting up the sun. And then you try to draw a straight line up the back of your leg, because they always had a line up the back of the nylon hose. And you had to seen some of the lines that we drew up the back. And the makeup on our legs would rub off if you got warm, and it would be streaking, and it was something else. I've had several jobs in my life. I guess the first one was working for the college farm when I checked the chicken. And then in college, during semesters, I went to Madison and worked at a restaurant called the Huddle Restaurant. And I can remember I worked during Christmas vacation. That was the first time that I was away from home on Christmas. But there wasn't any other restaurants in Madison open, and they had a big Air Force field called Truex Field there, and the parents was coming to visit their sons that were in the service. So we would let so many in at a time, and then when they were done, they would leave, let so many more in, because they were lined up way down the block. And I was really tired, but I think I made about $15 that day in tips, and I thought I was really something. Because with that, I bought me a bright red coat, and it was reversible. It was red on one side and tan on the other. And I wore that for several years. After college, when we moved to Missouri, I worked some at a motel, cleaning rooms. And if you ever want to get in and mess, that's the place to work. Every once in a while, there would be a truck come in, and there would be a driver and maybe two people sitting in the front. And this guy would rent the cabin to them, and then him not knowing, I guess he didn't know, the back would be full of people, and so there'd be like 20 people in that one motel room. And after they leave, I'd have to go in and clean after, which was no fun. Then from there, I worked on the bookmobile for a while, and drove it and hit a tree limb and cracked the windshield. But I found roads in this county that I never knew existed. It was pretty interesting, but it was kind of hard to drive on some of the roads, especially if you passed a big truck where the bookmobile would be top heavy and it would kind of teeter a little. And me not being the best driver, it was a little hairy sometimes. I also worked at the Ready Mix off and on for several years. From there, I worked at the dollar store. I worked there until about 2 or 3 months after the tornado. Then, every time that they would change managers, they would call me back to run it until they could get somebody else. I think that was the last place I worked around here. I guess of all the jobs that I worked at, being a waitress was the worst. You had to take so much from people. I know one bunch made me cry one time, but after they found out that I was crying, they left a dollar tip, which was very unusual, getting that much of $1. After I moved down here, my best friend died. We moved in May, and she died in August. There was 5 of us that used to be together a lot. And like on Sundays, we would go down to this one lady's house and play Rook or any other games that we had. And now they are all gone. I'm the only one left. So, as of right now, I don't have anybody much to run around with. With Ralph gone like 3 or 4 days a week, it gets pretty lonesome. People say that you're supposed to look forward to your golden years. Well, I don't know what's so golden about them. When we were growing up, there were so many things different than you all have now. We had no refrigerators. I was a junior in high school when we got electricity. And the day they put the electricity in, we went to Montgomery Ward and got a refrigerator. And they bought me a pink radio. I was in high school at that time. And after my mother and dad both died, which was maybe 20 years or so, that refrigerator was still running. It had a space for 2 ice cube trays, but boy, we thought we were in hog heaven. Until then, the ice truck would come around, and we would buy big chunks of ice to put in an ice box, which would keep the milk cold and keep vegetables pretty cold, but of course, nothing like the refrigerator. We moved a lot, and I've never found out why. I'm sure that my dad paid the rent, but it seemed like we'd move maybe every 2 years or so. And I asked Flo and Fawn both why we moved so much, and they didn't know either. But one place that we lived in was really a nice big house, and we had neighbors next door that were very nice, but he was a bootlegger, or he made his own whiskey. He grew lots of corn, and there was a haystack out in the middle of the field that was never moved, and we could see him going out there and putting bottles in the haystack. So they had regular customers. The customers would come to the end of their driveway, and there's a culvert there. And we would see her go out and have her apron folded up. Now, she'd put something out of her apron in the culvert, and maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, a car would drive by and park and get under the culvert, drive off. One night that we were sitting in our dining room, and I can remember I was sitting at the dining room table, and all of a sudden our house just lit up like bright sunshiny day. And we ran to the windows, and there was cars surrounding our whole house. Well, come to find out, they were raiding the house next door, which that's what they said. But of course, when they saw our lights, saw what was happening at our house, well, they had put everything away. So we thought that it was probably a put-up job, but kind of a scary thing at that time. We had different sayings, of course, then than we have now. One thing that we used to do, it was maybe a little bit before my time, but to make love. And you'd have a flashlight with you, and you'd sneak up to the car that was parked and turn the flashlight on just to see who was in there. Well, my brother and his girlfriend, which turned out to be his wife later, went bushwhacking one night, and they come up on this car, and they shined their light in, and come find out it was her own mother, which was pretty funny at the time. When I was about 7 or 8, Shirley Temple was real popular, and my sister Jen and her husband sent me a Shirley Temple dress. It was blue, and it was made like a sailor's dress. And oh, was I proud of that. I had it for years. I don't know what finally happened to it, but I'd like to have it now. Be worth some money. As I said, I had a good childhood, and am having a good life. I'm really proud of all you kids. You have had good parents to make you such good kids, and I hope you continue to be just as good as you are now. I know you'll get into something like we all did as we were growing up, but you had enough a good background to tell you not to do things. And just remember that this old grandmother loves you and is very proud of all your successes. And I hope that you can make sense out of this tape. I know I have gone different places with it and stuff, but as you know, I'm like that. So I'll close for now and be good as you are. And remember, I love you, your grandmother. You know, the crazy one.